for the second installment in our series on the Sermon on the Mount. I want to start this morning by introducing you to someone. This is Michael Carroll. Michael Carroll was 19, working as a garbage man, when he bought a lottery ticket, and he won $14.4 million. And over the next decade of his life, he bought mansions, he bought cars, he bought drugs, he bought a lot of things that he didn't need. And in the span of 10 years, Michael Carroll blew through $14.4 million and ended up unemployed, living on government assistance. Today, he makes $511 a week working as a butcher. Brings me to a question. When you find yourself in the midst of blessing, what do? When you find yourself at the top, how do you use your resources? I think most of us, if we're being honest, would probably at least be somewhat like Michael Carroll, because when you find yourself in the midst of blessing, you tend to focus on you. When you have an uptick in your finances, you tend to spend it on yourself. And to some degree, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way of the world, though, which is exactly what Jesus is approaching in the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about it last week. Jesus is redefining what it means to be blessed. He's redefining discipleship and at the same time redefining what it means to be blessed. The Beatitudes are a winning formula for the losers of society. It's a victory speech. It's a declaration of dependence. It's an announcement of who wins, and it's not the mighty, the affluent, the powerful. That's how we often define blessed. Blessed are the wealthy. Blessed are the assertive. Blessed are the educated. But Jesus turns that whole structure on its head and defines blessed with words like humble and meek and blessed are those who mourn. Not exactly the character traits that we would think of when we think of being blessed. But that's what the Beatitudes is all about. It's about redefining blessed. And kingdom citizens define blessedness differently. So after our Lord gives the Beatitudes and redefines what it means to be blessed, he then turns to how people are to live out their blessing. Look with me at Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 13. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But the salt has become tasteless, if it has become tasteless. How can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by people. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people put a light under a lamp or under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Your light must shine before people in such a way that they may use your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Any of you ever forced to read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens when you were in school? Maybe you chose to read it. It's a great novel. You remember the opening lines, A Tale of Two Cities? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the season of hope, or the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. And although Charles Dickens' novel was set in 1859 in London and Paris during the French Revolution, I think there's a lot of wisdom there that applies to us living in this day and age, right? In many ways, this is the best of times. I can call up my son who lives 12 hours away and not only talk to him on my cell phone, I can look him in the eye through a thing called FaceTime. You know what I'm talking about, right? Remember when you had these rotary dial phones hanging on the wall of your home and you had to put your finger in the dial and turn it all the way over 7 times? And if you messed up, well, that was tragic. Start all over again. That was a nuisance. And if you wanted any privacy, you had to take that long twisty cord and pull it around the corner to try to get some alone time. Remember dial-up internet? Certainly we've come a long way. It is the best of times in many ways. But I think we would have to admit that in many ways it's the worst of times. Just get on social media or Twitter and your blood starts to boil. Your blood pressure starts to rise as you look around the world and see what's going on in our culture. We live in a time of great unrest. Everybody seems to be mad at something. If given enough time, they can certainly find something to be mad at. This is the best of times and the worst of times. And if there was ever a time for the church to stand up and stand out, it's now. What this world needs is a salt and light revolution. How we handle this, though, makes all the difference. You can look around the world and see all the things that are going on and get angry and share those memes on Facebook that are anything but kind. I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here. I don't think he's talking about returning anger for anger or malice for malice. Unfortunately, the salt has become too comfortable in the shaker, right? Jesus didn't say you are the salt of the shaker. For us to be the salt of the earth disciples that Jesus was getting at, we must get out of the shaker and get into the soup. But I don't want to get in the soup because the soup is hot. There's things floating around in there that I don't like. Celery, canned tomatoes, maybe okra. I don't want that in my soup. Plus, when I get in the soup, I disappear. I'll just stay in the salt where I look like everybody else, where I fit. But Jesus says if you want to make a difference, you've got to get out of the salt shaker because you can't do any good in the shaker. Salt was made for soup. When salt goes into the soup, two things happen. Number one, it dissolves. And number two, the character of the soup is changed. Although the salt disappears, the flavor lingers. The salt changes the environment that it's dropped into. So you can complain about the world around you. You can gripe at everybody that'll listen. But have you left the shaker? Salt is meant to provide flavor. You know that. That's one of the primary purposes of salt, to season food. Virtually everything has salt in it. Even desserts that we love, like cake and pie, most of them have at least a pinch of salt in them. This was one of the main uses for salt in Jesus' day, to provide flavoring, but also a primary use was to prevent spoilage. Salt was a preservative then, it is now. Without refrigeration in ancient times, salt was sprinkled on meats to at least delay the spoilage to some degree. Salt also stings. We sometimes use the phrase pouring salt into the wound, which is a reference to somebody saying something insensitive to someone who is already hurting. Salt can actually be used as an antiseptic, but it hurts. Of course, once the healing begins, the hurt goes away. Salt is also necessary for strength. The body needs salt. Roman soldiers used to sprinkle salt on their food in order to give them strength. We also know that salt creates thirst. Why do you think bars have complimentary nuts sitting on the counter? So that the patrons will eat them up and become more and more thirsty and thus spend more and more money. The world is like a rotting piece of meat. And maybe, just maybe, we can delay the spoilage as we act as a preservative. Yeah, this world is kind of like that piece of meat that sits out in the hot Tennessee sun. It slowly starts to decay until the whole thing is rotten. And as Christians, we penetrate the culture. We season the meat. We slow the spoilage. We provide a sting, more than likely. I mean, truth hurts. But the truth also provides healing. So it may hurt first, but it's going to provide the healing that is so desperately needed. We also provide strength to those who are weakened by sin. And hopefully we make people thirsty. Hopefully people will thirst and want what Jesus has to offer, that living water. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's a lot. How can one person like myself make a difference in this culture? Do you see how out of hand it is? How in the world am I going to make such a difference? But here's the thing about salt. The beautiful thing about salt is just a little pinch can go a long way. Just a small bit of salt can make a huge difference. Sociologist Robert Bellah says this. He says, the governing values of a whole culture may be changed when 2% of the people have a new vision. Only 2% to change a culture. This applies to your work, this applies to your school, this even applies to the church. It also applies to every town and city in the world. I mean, consider Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis chapter 18. You can turn there if you want. Genesis chapter 18. Consider Sodom and Gomorrah. God is going to rain down his wrath and his judgment on these cities because of their rampant immorality. And Abraham tries to run interference. He steps in and he strikes a deal with God. Notice what is written, starting in verse 23. Abraham approached and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" So the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the entire place on their account. And Abraham replied, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am only dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the entire city because of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." And he spoke to him yet again and said, "Suppose 40 are found there." And he said, "I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there." And he said, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." And he said, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it on account of the 10. And as soon as he finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. And so God accepted the deal. He was willing to withhold judgment if Abraham could find just 50 righteous people in the city. Of course, God was willing to suspend his judgment if just 10 righteous people could be found living in Sodom. But in the end, 0 righteous people could be found. I mean, there was Lot. Lot could have stepped up. He could have done something, but he stayed in the salt shaker. He was so caught up in his environment that he couldn't see the opportunity that was provided by God. In fact, as he was fleeing with his family, his wife was so tethered to the city, she turned around to take one last glimpse of what she was leaving behind, and she turned into a pillar of what? Of salt, right. His 2 daughters left with him because their husbands refused to leave, but he had an incestuous relationship with them. I mean, if Lot would have won his own family, if he had just won his own family, it'd be 12 people. There'd be more than enough needed to suspend God's judgment. But in the end, the city couldn't be saved. Just a pinch can make a huge difference. It is my humble opinion that our world is not just decaying due to rampant immorality and the overt wickedness that we see accepted and promoted. Our world is decaying because the righteous cannot be located. They're content staying in the shaker. And my friends, salt belongs in the soup. It may be hot. It may be unsavory. But that's exactly what is necessary. Because we are the only hope for a rotting world. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by people. What's that all about? We understand the first part, you are the salt of the earth. We understand getting out of the shaker. What about that second part? Well, understand that in ancient times, homes had a flat roof. And these flat roofs were where a lot of the partying took place. Much like we use our back patio or our back porch, many people in ancient times would use the roof of their house as a gathering place. So wedding receptions, fellowship activities, whatever it may be, that's where it took place. And after a while, all the trampling and all the partying ended up causing holes in the roof. In order to fix the holes, something called gypsum was used, and gypsum is a soft sulfate mineral that would be mixed with water so that it turned into a paste. Then it would be coagulated with salt and spread across the holes that are in the roof The hot sun would bake this gypsum compound so that it would harden and become a sealant. So this was great for sealing up holes, but the salt was useless at this point, at least for the purposes that we mentioned earlier. It was only good for being trampled underfoot by men. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. You, me, we are the salt of the earth. You know what that means, right? That if there's any hope for this world, it's going to come through people like us. You are the ones who flavor and season the world. You are the ones that act as a preservative. You are the ones that provide strength. You are the ones that make people thirsty. If there is any hope for this world at all, it's going to be found in you. You are the difference maker, but you've got to get out of the salt shaker and into the soup. You lose your saltiness, you lose your distinctiveness, you lose your usefulness when you stay in the shaker and sit behind your computer and rail on the world and all of its problems. Okay. Enough about salt. Let's talk a minute about light. So we know salt provides flavor. We know it's a preservative. We know that it can provide healing. We know that it can make people thirsty. What about light? What does light do? Well, light exposes, it illuminates, and it reveals. It also penetrates. Look at it again. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Your light must shine before people in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Light has one job. You know what it is? To go public. That's light's one job, to go public. What good is a light that stays turned off? It serves no purpose, right? When you turn on a light, the darkness immediately submits to it. When light shines in a room, light immediately wins, every time. In order to grasp the magnitude of what Jesus is saying here, you really have to go to his statement in John chapter 8, verse 12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And understand what's going on as he says those words. He is in the tabernacle, in the court of the women, right? He's in the temple, the court of the women, which was a busy place. It would be a great place to gather an audience. And he sits down to teach. Remember, when a rabbi sat down to teach, it meant that he was going to give the core or the essence of his teaching. Something else is going on at this time. It's the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths. And so at this time, there's a big celebration. In the court of women, there were 4 big candelabra that were lit, and it is said that these candelabra were so bright that they would light every courtroom and every courtyard in the city, that every part of the city would be lit up. And it's in this setting that Jesus stands up and then sits down and says, I am the light of the world. In other words, these candelabra, they're going to fade out. They're eventually going to dim and they're going to go out, but I am the light that can light up your life forever. The light in the temple was brilliant, but it would flicker and die. And Jesus is claiming to be the light that will last. Here's something else. The law of Moses was meant to be a light that illuminated the character of God. It was also meant to shine the spotlight on the seriousness of sin. The law brought light, the need for atonement, but there was also darkness associated with the law, right? For one, it could never provide the ultimate remedy for sin. Paul alluded to the fact that the law became a wall between Jew and Gentile. The darkness of the law is most clearly seen in the scribes and the Pharisees' perversion of it. They had gone well beyond the legitimate dictates of the law by adding their own traditions and hedge laws. As a result, the law became burdensome. And like a yoke, it became heavy on the people. The scribes and the Pharisees took something that was intended to be spiritual and made it rote and mechanical. What they completely missed is that the law was intended to lead people to the Messiah. The law was never intended to be permanent. Rather, its purpose was to point people to the coming Messiah. You see, although the law was meant to be a light that exposed how dirty the room was. It was never meant to be the broom that swept it clean. You know what the rabbis taught that Messiah meant? The rabbis taught that the word Messiah, the concept of Messiah, meant light. In fact, light had special association for the Jewish people. Psalm 27:1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Isaiah 60 verse 19, no longer will you have the sun for light by day, nor for brightness will the moon give you light, but you will have the Lord for an everlasting light and your God for your glory. Micah said, though I dwell in darkness, the Lord is a light for me. Consider all of this in light of Jesus' statement, I am the light of the world. What Jesus is really saying is, I'm the Messiah. He's come and I'm Him. I'm the one that the prophets spoke of. I'm the one the law pointed to. I am Him, the one you've been waiting for. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. He who follows me. Some versions may say, whoever follows me. Whoever, which means not just Jew, that Jesus is expanding the circle to include the Gentiles as well. And this, of course, didn't sit well with the religious leaders. Their stubborn, hard heart wouldn't let the light in, and as a result, Jesus tells them that they don't even know who God is. They don't know the Scriptures. They don't know God. They were living in darkness. Notice verse 27. They did not realize that He had been speaking to them about the Father. The tragedy was the whole history of the Israel people was designed so that they would recognize Jesus when He came. The fact that the religious elite didn't even recognize Jesus as the Messiah was proof positive that they didn't know the law or the prophets or God. They had become so caught up in their own traditions and their own Mishnah or oral law that they had forgotten everything that had been said, or at least ignored everything that had been said about the coming Messiah. They were blind to God and what He was doing. Jesus was illuminating God, the Scriptures, and everything that the law and the prophets spoke about, yet these self-professed experts in the law couldn't see it. So when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, He's saying, I am Him. I'm the one Isaiah prophesied about. I'm the one that the prophets pointed to. I am who the law was saying would come. But Jesus doesn't just say, I am the light of the world. He says, you are the light of the world. What's He getting at? What's He saying? He's saying that you and I are transmitters of God's glory. What's the purpose of light? To dispel darkness, right? And we dispel the darkness of this world by illuminating the character of Christ. Light has one purpose: to go public. And we are His ad campaign. During election season, sometimes people will put, signs in their yard showing which candidate that they support. Can people look at you and see who you support? Can people look to you and see who you stand with? Do they understand that you are the advertisement, the walking billboard for Christianity? Can people see who you support? One of the great themes of the Bible is the glory of God through the advancement of the kingdom. Are you living out that theme? Because God wants us to get out of the shaker, shake up this world by waking up and shaking up the church. He wants to start a salt and light revolution. The question is, are you in? Are you all in to what He wants to do in this world around you? And understand, this takes on many forms, and many of those forms are wrong. They're taking the wrong approach and it's not working. Sharing those insensitive memes on Instagram or Facebook doesn't work. Nobody's mind ever was changed on Facebook. But we feel good about ourselves. We're standing up. Folks, standing up looks like standing with Jesus. Being salt and light. Seeking to glorify Him in all that we do. Illuminating what is wrong, but also following that with the healing that comes through the gospel. We are transmitters of God's light, which means that we are to be sharing the gospel with those around us. And if all we're about is malice and anger at what's going on, we're not going to make much headway. Look, if everybody hates us, something's wrong. If everybody in the world around us hates the Christians here at Walnut Street Church of Christ, we're doing something wrong. But if everybody loves us, we're doing something wrong. To be a salt and light disciple means that some will be drawn in and some might not want anything to do with us. But our role and responsibility is to always shine the light and to always step out of the shaker, so that no matter what, we are showing Christ to a world that so desperately needs Him. If you've gone to the movies any time in your life, you know that before the movie starts, there are trailers. You know what trailers are, right? We call them coming attractions. And so before the movie that you came to watch actually starts, there's several previews of movies that are going to be released in the near future. And one thing you notice about most of these trailers or these previews is they highlight the best parts of the movie, because that's the goal. They want to pique your interest and make you want to go see the movie by showing you the coming attractions and highlighting all the best parts of the movie. Now, all of us have gone to see one of those movies and walked away saying, well, the best parts of that were in the previews. It was a terrible movie, right? I mean, you could have just watched the previews and that would have been enough. But that's the idea, is that we show you the best parts. We highlight the great scenes in the movie so that you will want to go see the motion picture. Well, there's a big show in town. God is the director. The Holy Spirit is the producer. Jesus is the star of this show. He came. He died. He rose again. He ascended into heaven. And He's coming back. And when He comes back, He's going to separate the sheep from the goats, and some will go live with Him in tranquility and peace for all eternity. Some will be separated from Him for all eternity. In the meantime, do you know who we are? We're the coming attractions. We're the previews. And we give the people around us insight into what is to come. We show people a preview of how this whole thing plays out. We are a preview of the upcoming show. You and I are the coming attractions, and the hope is, here's the hope, that when they see us, they'll want to see the rest of the movie.